My name is Avery Caldwell, and I was 32 years old when my parents decided to make me the punchline of their anniversary party. There were 30 guests in the room that night, people who had watched me grow up, people who had eaten at our table, hugged me at holidays, and smiled in my face for years. The toast had just started. Glasses were raised, phones were out. Everyone expected a sweet story about marriage, sacrifice, and family. Then my mother reached for my hand, pulled me close like she was about to say something loving, and smiled at the crowd. She said, "Here is the mistake we kept from our reckless years." For 1 second I thought I had heard her wrong. Then my father gave a little smirk, lifted his glass, and said, "Admitting that still feels humiliating." The room exploded with laughter. Not nervous laughter. Real laughter. Loud, comfortable, ugly laughter. My brother looked down at his drink, but his shoulders were shaking. My sister stared at the table. A cousin I used to babysit looked away like making eye contact with me would somehow make her responsible. I stood there in my blue dress, holding a gift I had spent weeks choosing for them, and something inside me went completely quiet. I did not cry. I did not scream. I placed the gift on the table, slipped off the family bracelet my mother had insisted I wear, and walked out before dessert was served. That night, I drove away from Charleston and cut off every person who had laughed, watched, or stayed silent. 2 years passed. I built a life where no one knew that story. Then one afternoon, my phone rang from an unknown number, and a man's voice said, "Ma'am, this is Officer Reynolds. Before I tell you what he said next, tell me what the weather is like where you are. Does it match your mood today? Because this is not just a story about humiliation. This is about what happens when the daughter they called a mistake finally becomes the one person they cannot afford to lose." I was born into a family that looked perfect in public while quietly wounding the person easiest to ignore. My father, Richard Caldwell, built Harbor Light Senior Care from one small home care office into a respected chain of assisted living and in-home care services across South Carolina. My mother, Elaine Caldwell, stood beside him at fundraisers and pearls, smiling like kindness came naturally. To strangers, they were proof that family values still existed. Inside our house, those values had a ranking system, and I was always last. My older brother, Grant, was the heir before he ever earned it. He got the proud introductions, the business camps, the hand on the shoulder whenever people asked who would take over one day. My sister, Marissa, survived by staying pleasant and silent whenever trouble aimed itself at someone else. Then there was me, Avery, the child my parents never planned for. When I was little, they called me a surprise baby. As I got older, the phrase sharpened. My mother would say, "We were finally getting our lives back when Avery came along." My father would laugh and call me life's little joke. I spent years trying to become useful enough to be loved. I earned good grades, volunteered at hospitals, helped with family events, and smiled through every insult disguised as humor. I studied public health and healthcare administration, then became a patient experience coordinator at a hospital outside Charleston. I handled angry families, confused patients, overwhelmed nurses, complaint reports, care delays, and broken communication systems. My father called it emotional paperwork. Grant called it a cute job. I told myself their opinions did not matter, but deep down I still hoped they would respect me one day. That anniversary party killed that hope. After I walked out, I did not go back for my purse, coat, or gift receipt. I got in my car, turned off my phone, and drove until the house disappeared behind me. By morning, I was in Virginia, eating crackers in a gas station parking lot with no plan at all. Strangely, the silence felt like oxygen. A week later, I ended up in Minneapolis because a woman I once met at a public health conference said it was cold but kind to people who needed a new beginning. I rented a small apartment above a bakery, found work at a nonprofit clinic, changed my number, deleted social media, and made one rule for myself: no Caldwells. Not on holidays, not on birthdays, not when guilt came whispering at midnight. The first year was hard. I jumped at knocks on the door. I dreamed of people laughing with cake in their mouths. I expected my mother to appear and call me dramatic. But slowly, fear became routine, and routine became a life. I joined therapy. I made friends who did not know my family name. At the clinic, my supervisors noticed I was good at turning chaos into systems. When families complained that nobody called back, I built a response tracker. When staff struggled with discharge questions, I wrote clearer scripts. For the first time, being useful felt like purpose instead of begging. That was where I met Miles Chen, an occupational therapist with a calm voice and terrible handwriting. He never pushed me to explain my past. He noticed that I sat facing exits and apologized when someone else bumped into me. One evening, after a brutal shift, he handed me coffee and asked, "What do you need to feel safe tonight?" Not "Why are you like this?" Not "When will you get over it?" Just that. By the end of the second year, Minneapolis no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like mine. I had work that mattered. Friends, therapy, and a man who understood that love should not feel like a courtroom. I thought the worst was behind me. Then, on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, my phone rang from a number I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Unknown numbers had become something I ignored without thinking. But this one rang again after I declined it, and the area code made my stomach tighten. I stood under the clinic awning, watching my breath turn white in the cold, and answered. A steady male voice said, "Ma'am, this is Officer Reynolds with the Charleston Police Department. Am I speaking with Avery Caldwell?" My whole body went still. I had not heard my full name spoken with a Charleston accent in 2 years. I said yes, but my voice sounded distant. Officer Reynolds told me there had been an incident involving my father, Richard Caldwell. He had been found disoriented after a minor traffic accident near one of the Harbor Light offices. The crash was not severe, but paramedics suspected a neurological episode, possibly a stroke or a transient ischemic attack. He was conscious but confused. In his wallet, behind his insurance card, they found an old emergency contact card with my name on it. Hospital records from a previous family emergency had led them to my current contact. Officer Reynolds was careful. He was not asking me to come home or passing along a family message. He was only confirming that I was listed as next of kin and asking whether the hospital could share basic updates. A procedure? A formality? A stranger doing his job. Still, it felt like the floor had opened beneath me. For 2 years, I had imagined many ways my family might reach me. An apology letter, a cousin with tears, a private investigator. I had not imagined a police officer, my father's name, and the word neurological in the same sentence. I thanked him, wrote down the hospital name, and ended the call before my knees gave out. My first feeling was not sadness. It was anger. Not because my father was sick, but because even his emergency had found a way to pull me back into a life I had fought to escape. By the time I got home, I had 3 missed calls from Charleston and 1 voicemail. Then the emails started. My mother wrote that my father had scared everyone, that doctors were running tests, and that this was bigger than pride. She ended with, "Please come home." For once, she did not write love. Grant's email was shorter. "Dad is stable. We need to discuss medical authority and the family trust. This is not the time for your personal issues. Call me." I stared at that line. Being called a mistake in front of 30 guests was a personal issue. 2 years of silence was a personal issue. But the trust, the company, and the paperwork were urgent to them. Marissa's voicemail came later. She was crying. She said Dad was confused. Mom was falling apart, and Grant was acting like he had already inherited everything. Then her voice dropped. Avery, something is wrong at Harbor Light. Grant keeps saying he needs your signature, and he keeps telling Mom not to explain too much. Please be careful. That was when fear replaced anger. I opened the old email account I had abandoned after leaving Charleston. Hundreds of unread messages appeared like ghosts. At first, they were casual. Where are you? Stop being dramatic. Mom is embarrassed. Then they changed. Dad is asking about you. Your silence is cruel. After that came the legal subjects. Trust update. Required beneficiary response. Proposed restructuring. One message from a law firm said that because of Richard Caldwell's declining health and the need for leadership continuity at Harbor Light, all beneficiaries were being asked to sign an amended trust agreement. My name appeared as a contingent beneficiary whose lack of response could delay business decisions. For 2 years, my absence had been treated like an attitude problem. Now it was a legal obstacle. Miles read the email over my shoulder and said, "You need a lawyer before you need a plane ticket." 2 days later, a certified envelope arrived. I did not know how they found my address, and that made my hands shake. Inside was a letter from Grant, a waiver, and a sticky note in his handwriting. Do the decent thing for once. Sign and send back. The waiver said I would not contest changes to the family trust, that I acknowledged Grant was best suited to lead Harbor Light, and that I would accept a private settlement in exchange for no further claims, public statements, or interference. Public statements? That phrase told me they remembered what they had done. They were not afraid I would lie. They were afraid I would tell the truth. I placed the papers on my table and thought about the 30 guests laughing, my mother's hand around my wrist, my father's glass in the air, and the way nobody said my name like I mattered. Then I wrote one sentence in my notes app. They do not get to erase me twice. Grant came to Minneapolis 11 days after the certified letter arrived. He did not warn me because warning people gives them power, and Grant never liked giving power to anyone beneath him. I saw him through the clinic window, standing near the entrance in a dark wool coat, holding a leather folder and checking his watch, like the city itself was late. For a second, I thought my mind had invented him. Trauma does that sometimes. It brings old faces into new rooms just to prove you are not safe yet. Then he looked up, saw me, and smiled. Not warmly, victoriously. I told my supervisor I had a personal emergency and walked outside before he could turn my workplace into another family stage. Grant opened his arms like we were siblings in a holiday commercial. "Avy," he said. "Long time." I did not hug him. "How did you find me?" He looked offended. "You are not in witness protection. People have addresses." That was Grant's talent. He could make violations sound like common sense. We ended up on a bench outside the clinic, snow packed along the curb. He did not ask how I had been. He opened the folder and explained the trust like I was a slow employee. "Dad's condition is unpredictable," he said. "We need clean leadership. Harbor Light cannot be stuck in legal limbo because you are still upset about one stupid dinner." I stared at him. One stupid dinner. 30 people laughed while our parents called me a mistake. His face tightened with annoyance, not shame. "You always take one moment and turn it into your whole identity." I said. "No, Grant. You all turn me into a punchline." I just finally left the room. He leaned closer. "This is bigger than your feelings. There are facilities, staff, residents, investors. Do you even understand what is at stake?" I said. "Enough to know you would not be here if my signature did not matter." For the first time, his confidence flickered. Then he pulled out the settlement agreement. The number inside was not small. It could have paid my loans, bought a better car, maybe helped with a house. He slid it toward me like he was feeding a stray dog. "Mom thought this was generous. Sign it, take the money, and keep living whatever little life you made up here. Something cold moved through me. My little life had friends who checked on me, work that mattered, a man who respected my silence, and a kitchen where nobody mocked my appetite. It was little only to someone who measured worth in control. I stood. You flew halfway across the country for nothing. Grant's face reddened. If you fight this, you will lose. You walked away. That has consequences. I turned to leave, and he used the line he had saved for the end. Dad may die thinking his youngest child cared more about pride than family. It landed. I hated that it landed. He saw it too, and satisfaction crossed his face. That was when Miles appeared at the clinic door and said, "Avery, you ready?" Grant looked him over and laughed softly. So this is the new audience. I walked past him without answering. That night, the pressure became a storm. My mother posted online about the heartbreak of having a child choose bitterness during a father's illness. Within hours, cousins I had not heard from in years found my email. One said I would regret this when Dad died. Another said I was punishing my mother for a joke that got out of hand. Grant's lawyer sent another letter warning me not to make defamatory statements about the family or Harbor Light. That almost made me smile. I had said nothing. They were threatening me for a truth I had not spoken yet. At work, I started making small mistakes. Miles tried to help, but I pulled away from him too. I was ashamed of how easily they could still shrink me. One message from my mother and I was 12 again, being told I was too sensitive. One look from Grant, and I was 17 again, being told not to embarrass the family. The lowest point came on a Tuesday night in the clinic parking lot. Snow fell hard, softening the city into something almost gentle. I sat in my car with the waiver on my lap, Grant's settlement number glowing under the parking lot light. For one exhausted moment, I considered signing. Not because they deserved it. Not because I wanted the money. Because I wanted the noise to stop. Then I looked at the signature line. Avery Caldwell. My name, waiting to be used against me. If I signed, they would tell the story their way. Avery was unstable. Avery ran away. Avery accepted money. Avery agreed Grant was the rightful leader. Avery was never pushed out. She simply did not belong. My hands stopped shaking. I drove home, opened my laptop, and searched for trust attorneys who handled out-of-state family business disputes. By midnight, I had sent 3 consultation requests. Then I emailed Grant. From now on, all communication goes through my attorney. Do not contact my workplace again. Do not come to my home. Do not mistake my silence for consent. He replied in 7 minutes. You have no idea what you are starting. I whispered to the empty room. Maybe not. But I know what I am ending. The first attorney told me to sign and move on. He said family business disputes were expensive, ugly, and rarely worth the damage. I thanked him and left before he finished explaining how people like me often overestimated their leverage. The second attorney listened more carefully but seemed afraid of Harbor Light's healthcare side. The third was Teresa Novak, a trust and business lawyer with silver hair, sharp glasses, and the calm energy of someone who had watched rich families destroy themselves for 20 years. She read the waiver, reviewed the letters, listened to the anniversary story, and said, "They are not asking you for peace. They are asking you to make their paperwork easier." Something in my chest loosened. Teresa requested every document I had. Within a week, she confirmed what Grant had tried to hide. Under the Caldwell family trust, I was not a primary decision-maker, but I was not nothing. My grandfather had written the trust broadly enough that all 3 grandchildren retained contingent rights tied to ownership changes, emergency leadership restructuring, and sale of major company assets. Grant could run daily operations, but he could not legally erase me without notice, process, and informed consent. Teresa also noticed the non-disparagement clause was broad enough to stop me from discussing family conduct that could affect the company's reputation. That means, she said, they are buying your silence, not just your signature. Hearing it plainly made me angry in a cleaner way, not anger that burns your own house down, anger that lights a path. Around that time, I returned to an online support group for adults who had gone no contact or low contact with toxic families. I posted without using my name or mentioning Harbor Light. I wrote about being called a mistake in public, leaving, and then being contacted only when my signature became useful. By morning, there were hundreds of responses, different stories, same message. You are not cruel for refusing to be used. You are allowed to exist without earning your place. I cried reading those comments because they proved I had not imagined the shape of my life. The problem was never that I failed to explain my pain. The problem was that my family benefited from not understanding it. That realization changed me. I stopped asking why they treated me that way and started asking what I wanted to build. The answer came from my work. At the clinic, I kept seeing the same failures everywhere. Families terrified because nobody explained care plans. Staff overwhelmed because systems were built for billing, not humans. Elderly patients treated like tasks instead of people. I knew how to fix pieces of that, so I started taking weekend consulting projects. A home care agency needed better family communication. A rehabilitation center needed a complaint response system. A nonprofit senior program needed staff training. I built dashboards, scripts, follow-up workflows, and plain language guides. Response times dropped. Family satisfaction rose. Staff turnover slowed when workers felt supported instead of blamed. After 3 months, one client referred another. I named the business ClearPath Care Consulting because that was what I had always wanted as a child, a clear path through people who kept changing the rules. Leaving my clinic job was terrifying, but safety is not always growth. Miles took me to dinner the night I signed my first 6-month consulting contract. He raised a glass of ginger ale and said, "To building something they cannot take credit for." ClearPath grew slowly, then suddenly. I worked with assisted living homes, home care agencies, and community clinics. I specialized in transparency between care providers and families because I knew what silence did to people. I built systems that forced information into the light. Weekly family updates, incident response timelines, escalation contacts, staff training, care conferences that did not bury bad news under polite phrases. One article I wrote titled, "The Cost of Calling Someone Too Sensitive," reached further than I expected. It was about how organizations and families fail when they treat people's concerns as inconvenience instead of data. A senior care newsletter picked it up. Then Priya Raman emailed me. She was a director at a senior tech investment group and liked my approach. On our call, she said, "Families do not expect perfection. They expect honesty before crisis." I wrote that down because it felt bigger than business. My own family had done the opposite. They hid truth until it became a weapon. That summer, ClearPath had enough clients for me to move from my kitchen table to a shared office. I hired a part-time analyst, then a retired nurse educator. I was not rich, but my money came from my own skill, not family approval, pity, or a settlement check designed to shut me up. The stronger my business became, the less Grant's threats frightened me. I still cared. Healing did not make me stone. Some nights I still dreamed of that anniversary party. But now I had other voices too. Clients who thanked me, staff who said my training helped, families who finally understood what was happening to someone they loved. Then, almost 6 months after Officer Reynolds called, a handwritten letter arrived from my mother. "Avery, your father is worse. Grant is making decisions I do not understand. Harbor Light is not what your grandfather wanted. I know I have no right to ask, but please come home before everything is gone." There was no real apology. but there was fear, and beneath it something I had never heard from her before. She was admitting that Grant could fail. I folded the letter and placed it beside Teresa's notes, my clear path case studies, and the trust documents Grant wanted me to sign without reading. For the first time, going back did not feel like surrender. It felt like strategy. I did not book a flight right away. The old Avery would have rushed back because guilt had always worked faster on her than love. The new Avery knew that walking into the Caldwell house without preparation would be like walking into court without evidence. So I prepared. Teresa requested the trust documents, medical authority forms, board minutes, investor communications, and proposed amendments involving Harbor Light. Grant ignored the first request. Teresa sent a second one with language that made even him answer. When the files arrived, Teresa and I reviewed them for 2 long evenings. The picture became clear. Harbor Light was not collapsing, but it was bleeding. Revenue had flattened. Lawsuit risk was rising. Online reviews had dropped. Several facilities had alarming staff turnover. There were warnings about incomplete care documentation, delayed incident notifications, and overnight staffing shortages. Grant had been managing reputation instead of reality, and in senior care, that was dangerous. I built a spreadsheet tracking every issue by facility, date, category, and likely cause. Then I compared it with public reviews, state inspection summaries, and employee comments. The pattern was obvious. Families were not angry because problems happened. They were angry because nobody told them the truth. Staff were not quitting because the work was hard. They were quitting because management punished people who reported problems. Silence protects the powerful for a while. Then it becomes evidence. I called Priya and told her everything. My father founded Harbor Light. My brother was running it. I was a trust beneficiary. There was family conflict, but there were also real care and governance issues. Priya listened, then said her fund had a minority stake and had been concerned for months. Grant was not dealing with one emotional sister. He was sitting on a business problem visible from the outside. I built a 90-day rescue proposal, independent quality audit, family transparency system, staffing review focused on retention, not blame, compliance retraining, reputation repair based on verified improvements, temporary leadership changes for anyone under audit. I included clear path case studies, metrics, dashboards, projected costs, and risk reduction. I did not write, "Grant is incompetent." The data said it politely. Teresa sent the proposal to the board with my conditions. I would not meet privately with Grant. I would not sign any trust amendment before review. Any role I took would be defined by contract, not family pressure. Any demand for my silence would be removed from trust negotiations. Grant called 20 minutes later. I did not answer. His voicemail said, "You think a few charts make you a savior. You ran away. You do not get to come back and act important." His voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time, I heard fear under the arrogance. The board scheduled the meeting for the following Friday in Charleston. My mother offered me a room at the house. I replied, "I have a hotel." On the plane back, I thought about the last time I left Charleston, driving through tears in a blue dress with no coat. This time, I returned with legal notes, financial analysis, care quality data, a board proposal, and the original waiver Grant had wanted me to sign. I kept it in a folder marked evidence, not proof that I was difficult. Proof that they knew I mattered before they were willing to say it. I went to the hospital first. My father was awake, smaller than I remembered. My mother sat beside him, holding coffee with both hands. He tried to say my name, but it came out broken. I stood at the foot of the bed and said, "I am here for the meeting. I am here because people depend on Harbor Light. I am not here to pretend nothing happened." My mother flinched. My father closed his eyes. It did not feel cruel. It felt honest. The boardroom at Harbor Light Senior Care sat on the top floor of the original headquarters. I had been there as a teenager, usually carrying forgotten papers while my parents introduced Grant as the future, and me as Avery, our youngest, like an afterthought. Walking in as a consultant with board materials in my hand felt unreal. Grant was already there in a navy suit, looking like a man warned not to explode. My mother sat pale and silent. Marissa's eyes were red. Priya had her tablet open. My father sat in a wheelchair near the end of the table, thin but alert. Teresa appeared on the screen, calm and ready. Grant started first. I want it noted that this meeting is highly irregular. Avery has no executive role here and no operational history with this company. I sat down. Priya said, "Noted. Now let her present." That was the first shift. I began with Harbor Light's own mission statement: dignity, safety, transparency, trust. Then I showed the data: delayed family notifications, unresolved complaints, staff resignations after reporting understaffing, state warnings answered with generic language but no measurable change, money spent on reputation management while training budgets were cut. Then I showed internal emails where Grant had written, "Hold family complaint responses until after restructuring, and do not create a paper trail unless legal requires it." The room changed. Nobody laughed. Nobody looked away. Grant interrupted again and again. Finally, he snapped, "She is doing this because she hates this family." I looked at him and said, "If I hated this family more than I cared about the residents, I would have let you keep running it." Silence followed. I explained my 90-day plan: independent audit, transparent family communication, staff retention review, compliance retraining, temporary removal of any executive connected to suppressed complaints, board oversight, outside CEO support during transition. ClearPath would advise, not control. I was not there to crown myself. I was there to end the idea that bloodline was the same as competence. A board member named Evelyn asked, "Avery, are you requesting Grant's removal?" I said, "I am requesting that operational authority be suspended from anyone whose decisions are under review. If that includes Grant, then yes." Grant stood so fast his chair hit the wall. "This is insane. I kept this company alive while she disappeared. She wants revenge because of one joke at a party." One joke. Before I could answer, Marissa spoke. It was not one joke. Everyone turned to her. Her voice shook. Mom called Avery a mistake in front of 30 people. Dad said admitting it was humiliating. We laughed or stayed quiet because that was easier than standing up to them. She looked at me. "I am sorry. I should have said it that night." My father motioned for paper. The nurse gave him a pen. It took almost a minute for him to write one sentence. Evelyn read it aloud. "Let her finish what I failed to protect." That was the final shift. The board voted to open an independent audit, suspend Grant from operational leadership, freeze discretionary distributions connected to executive performance, and bring in an outside interim CEO. ClearPath would be contracted for 6 months. Grant would keep only ownership rights pending review, with no authority over staff, complaints, or family communication. After the meeting, he followed me into the hallway. "You ruined me," he said. I shook my head. "No, I documented you. There is a difference." Over the next 6 months, Harbor Light changed painfully, then honestly. The audit uncovered hidden complaints, improper executive spending, and retaliation against staff who had raised concerns. Grant was removed permanently from the COO role. He had to repay company funds used for personal travel disguised as development meetings. If he wanted any future role, he would have to complete leadership remediation and start below people he once ordered around. To Grant, that was devastating. His identity had been built on entering rooms as the chosen son. Now he entered them as a cautionary tale. My parents faced their own consequences too. At a family brunch months later, in the same house where the anniversary party had happened, my mother stood before many of the same relatives who had laughed that night. She said, "I called my daughter a mistake because I was too proud to admit I had spent years failing her." My father added slowly, "I made my child carry my shame, then blamed her for the weight." No one laughed this time. I did not perform forgiveness. I only said, "Thank you for saying it out loud." That is where repair begins, not where it ends. I finished my 6-month project and returned to Minneapolis. Harbor Light's family satisfaction scores improved. Staff turnover dropped. Complaint response times were cut by more than half. Families began receiving truthful updates before small problems became betrayals. That mattered more to me than Grant's downfall. Revenge brought me back to Charleston, but purpose decided what I did there. The lesson is that your value cannot be determined by people who benefit from making you feel small. A family can give you a name, but it does not get to define your worth. Walking away from humiliation is not weakness. Setting boundaries is not disrespect. No one should be defined by the worst words ever spoken over them. My parents humiliated me in front of 30 guests at their anniversary party. 2 years later, they learned the daughter they laughed at was not the family mistake. I was the warning they ignored, the truth they buried, and the lesson they never saw coming.